So this is a triple required practical on plant hormones. It says students investigated the response of plant shoots to one-sided light. So we've got an experiment here where we have light shining just from one side of the shoot, and what's happened here is the shoot has grown towards the light. It's basically bent towards the light. What we can also see here are ink marks. So ink marks are drawn at the beginning of the shoot at even spaces, and then we can observe how these ink marks change over time as the shoot grows. So that's experiment A. Experiment B does the same but in a light-proof box, and then experiment C does the same with light all around the shoot. So the question for the first part says, suggest 2 control variables that the student should have used in their investigation. So one thing you can say is the room that it's in needs to stay the same because that can affect the rate of photosynthesis and growth. So it needs to have the same temperature. The other thing is that it's got a damp cotton wool here. On the bottom, you need to make sure there's the same amount of water in each cotton wool, because if one has more water, it might grow faster. So same amount of water for the second mark there. You could also say the same type of plant. You need to make sure you have the same type of shoot in each experiment because different plants grow differently. Now, part B of the question says, describe how experiment B and C acted as controls for the investigation. So a control is an experiment that you can use to compare your results. So for experiment B, for example, we have a light-proof box around the shoot. So this means we can see how the shoot would grow if there was no light at all. So that will allow us to have a comparison between no light whatsoever and one-sided light in experiment A. Then for experiment C, it's the opposite. There's light in all directions. So there's a lot of light and it's all directed from all the directions. So for that one, it allows us to compare experiment C, so all-round light compared to one-sided light. That's what it allows us to do. So for experiment B, it allows us to compare one-sided light with no light, and for experiment C, it allows us to compare all-sided light with one-sided light. Final part, give 2 conclusions that the student could make from the ink marks on the shoot in experiment A. So what we can see here is that in experiment A, the ink marks remain very close together near the bottom of the shoot, but further up near the tips and near the root, they're further apart. So what does that tell us? That tells us that growth has occurred at the top of the shoot, near the tips of it. And at the same time, it's not just growth, it's the bending. The bending has only occurred at the top there because you can see that's where the direction is changing. So the answer for this one is, you can say growth occurs at the tips for 1 mark and bending occurs at the tips for the second mark. That's how you get the marks there.